Welcome to Insightly. I'm Melissa McGinn.
And I'm Jordan Walker. We're your hosts on a mission to empower executives and business leaders with the knowledge they need to turn data into a driving force for innovation. Join us every episode as we share real-world case studies and provide practical tips to unlock the full potential of your business through data and analytics.
So if you're ready to transform your relationship with data, hit that subscribe button, because in the world of business, insight is power. Hey everyone, welcome back to Insightly. I hope everyone's having a great summer. We're really excited because today we have an interview. We have never done an interview episode before. We have Wichita's local, Ted Kriwiel, with us, and I'm going to let him introduce himself. But we just feel very privileged to get to have him with us today because, I mean, 2 data nerds isn't enough.
Yeah.
You know, we just had to bring in a third one. And so, Ted, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, set some context, some groundwork, and we'll go from there.
Well, first, I did not realize I was the first interview. I am honored to be the first interview.
When Alyssa and I talked about we wanted to bring in other experts or people that work in data to talk from their perspective, you were the very first name that we thought of.
Wow.
And we thought people are probably tired of hearing just us talk at this point.
Never. Never. I really hope this is not your last interview.
No, it won't be.
I really hope that.
We have more planned.
Oh, good. My name's Ted. I'm from Wichita. I've worked with a lot of companies on data and building software. I've spent the last 5 years at Moonbase Labs, and I actually just left. So I'm on the move right now. I'm not sure what I'm going to do next. I'm pretty entrepreneurial, but I'm kind of just looking at what do I want to do now? But I'm certain that data will be involved, software will be involved. I really love technology and helping people with tech.
That's awesome. So tell us a little bit about like your entry into loving this so much.
Yeah, so I think I've mistold my entry point. I used to say I started with my job at Network Kansas building dashboards for them, but I actually just recently remembered it goes back further than that. It was when I was 19 years old. I was part of this flag football league that I'd created with a friend, like about 30 of my friends, and we were really into stats. And so I created these really elaborate spreadsheets so that we could keep track of our stats. I created a website. I'd publish the spreadsheet every week on the web, and everyone was waiting to see what their stats were. I had really complicated like quarterback ratings built into it.
Wow.
And so that was my introduction to Microsoft Excel. A lot of people learn that for business, but I learned it
You're
for
probably
pleasure.
like pivot tables.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh yeah. No, there were pivot tables. There was all sorts of stuff. Like it was getting so gnarly. But yeah, I loved doing that. So that was my first thing with data. I came by it naturally. It was never a job.
so that was like natural. Like when you started like getting into all that tech, were you just figuring it out, but it just was like easy for you? Like,
No, I mean, well, it's easy. Anything that you can do that you love is easy for you.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
So I loved flag football, and I loved doing it with my friends, and I loved that they were waiting on me.
I would not want that pressure, but I'm glad that worked for you.
I think the pressure was like, this matters. And it didn't.
Yeah.
Let's be clear.
Yeah.
It didn't. But it mattered to us. And there's something special about that. I remember there was some, like, I was staying up late, and I'm in bed with my wife, and there was a little bit of conflict at 1 a.m. She's like, what are you doing? And I was like, I've got to get this formula to work because I got to publish it because the guys are waiting on me. And she's like, no, go to bed. Like, stop. But I take things seriously, and I love them.
Yeah, I have heard that kind of a story from a few other people who have, and I feel like my journey is probably a little bit similar. I didn't go into data because it was like, I want to go into data.
Yeah.
It was a genuine curiosity of other questions or other passions that kind of led me into it. I feel like that is kind of common for those who like really love it and aren't looking at it from what does my career look like? Just more of, I'm interested. Let's see what happens here.
Yes. I've seen that a lot. I think there's that sort of self-taught path, and then there's the other path of more technically taught. And I think there's upsides and downsides to both. I think the self-taught path, I love cranking on stuff nights and weekends when you have a day job, but you're like, I really want to work on whatever this is. One time I mapped all of the car wrecks in Wichita.
Wow.
I used the data, and that was like one of my first projects on Tableau. And I'll tell you,
That's awesome.
no one cares about that. I cared. My wife saw it.
I'm kind of interested.
I think I showed my cousin.
with that.
Yeah, like I like plotted all the density spots of where the most dangerous intersections were. Later, I realized actually the most dangerous spots where the highest volume of traffic. And so I was like, I don't actually have the real data I need to know where the most dangerous ones because I don't have traffic volume. And so that's where that ended. But I was working on that nights and weekends for fun.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's different.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not.
So did you take are you purely self-taught in data, or was this a part of any education pathway that you went down, or did you go back and explore any certificates or anything like that?
I would say I'm mostly, I didn't study this in school. I studied entrepreneurship, which is why I love starting stuff. All of my learning has come by problems that I'm interested in. I've just learned one problem after another. And once I conquer this one, I just find the next problem. The problem that really thrust me pretty deep into data was my work at Network Kansas. We had this, it was a nonprofit. We had this massive loan portfolio where we were creating gap financing for rural and underserved entrepreneurs. It was really cool. The software we used would spit out like an 8-point font spreadsheet-ish table on 30 pages of a PDF. And so we had, basically you could think of like these 50 different loan buckets with 8 or 9 loans in each one. And you would just have to skim it to find yours. And so I had 10 buckets or communities that I was serving. And I looked at that 2 times and I was like, I'm not doing this. I'm just not, I can't.
We don't have to live this way.
and the reality was what was kind of happening collectively on the team, no one wanted to look at it. So we were all not doing a great job. I found the tool Tableau and I just started banging my head against it. And I mapped the car wrecks in the city of Wichita. I started looking for open data sources. But I said, hey, could you give this to me as a CSV? They gave it to me. And I got some headway from my boss. I was like, hey, I think this could be done better. And he's like, well, sure, take a stab at it. Eric Peterson. He gave me runway to like, that wasn't my job. It wasn't my job. I was just like, this sucks. And he's like, yeah, you're right. And I was like, I think we could do better. And I bet I took a month just hacking away at that to where I finally had something. And the mock-up that I made, it's probably been 10 years. They still use today.
Wow.
And I left Network Kansas 5 years ago.
Were you at Network Kansas then?
I built dashboards for Network Kansas to where that became a huge part of my job there, as well as no-code apps. I was also doing that. And then I started picking up clients on the side, and it was pretty quick before I was like, oh, this is actually just a business. So I started the company LionGraph.
Okay, that's right. That's when we met. Yes.
I think I had just left Network Kansas. They were still a huge customer for mine. Like, I put on one hat, and then they were my biggest customer for that first year. But I started just an analytics company building dashboards.
That's right. I forgot about LionGraph. That is so cool. Alyssa, I don't know if I've told you this story, but why I'm a huge TED fan is because however long ago it was, there used to be this like series here in Wichita called Wichitalks. And it was essentially, they would have individuals come and speak, and it was the 20 slides in 20 seconds kind of format. TED spoke about the power of data storytelling. And it was the first time I was in the middle of my early journey of getting into data and analytics as a marketing person, which was very unfamiliar territory in that sector of marketing and advertising. I had started to get this feeling of it's not really just about reporting. It's about finding the story. How can we create better experiences? I wasn't finding other people that had that same mentality until TED walked up on stage. I don't even remember the exact things that you said, but I have a very clear visual of you standing on that stage and your slides in the background still in my head because of how impactful that was for me to finally be like, okay, I'm not crazy. Other people believe in this. And you were talking about how it's not just about looking at the numbers, it's about digging in deeper to really see the story. And I think you talked about problem solving through it and all of that. But yeah, that's why I've been a TED fan ever since. I beelined it. I was like, hi, we should meet. We should be friends. Let's go get coffee.
We did. And we went and got coffee right after. And I was like, hey, I'm not speaking into the void. There's people like me here.
Hashtag TED fan club.
I'm honored. I think it stops right here. You guys are it.
I doubt that.
Yeah,
maybe
we can find some others.
Yeah, please email hello@insightlypodcast.com if you would like to be a part of our TED fan club.
I don't remember if I said it in the Wichitalks, but the one thing I've repeated before, and I love this, I don't remember even where I've heard this, but if you think about in English class, when they teach you what a story is, it starts with the exposition, and then there's rising action, and then there's the climax and the resolution. They use a line chart to explain what stories are. Line charts are stories unfolding over time. And so if you think of the y-axis, it's the degree of tension, and the x-axis is time going on. And so the rising action is the line chart moving up, getting more tense, and the climax is the top of that line chart where it's like, that's the climax, we've made it, and then the resolution comes back down. You can see that story, but every line chart I design, I'm asking what story does it tell, and how can I accentuate the climax and the resolution and the tension that exists in the line chart? Because when a line chart is going down, sometimes that's really scary.
Yeah.
But if the line chart represents threats to our organization, it's fantastic.
Yes.
We're thrilled by it. But if it's revenue, it's devastating. And so there's those stories are baked in, and how people respond to that. That's just always been really important to me, is that these are not just data points. These are stories that we respond to and have to act on.
Absolutely. And I think that is so important, especially like I think that companies, and now data analytics is a career path. It wasn't really taught in this manner when we were all in school, but it's becoming a lot more familiar within companies. But I think that aspect of it's not just about a chart to give you the numbers. I've looked at reports before where it's like, okay, if you look at it visually, these charts and graphs look pretty, or I can skim over them. But then when you're really looking at it, it's like, what story are you actually trying to tell me with this? And I think that is incredibly important to keep in mind. The way that you're visualizing the data, the way that you're trying to convey that story, the context of where that data is coming from and what it's supposed to be like helping you with. Sometimes I think that gets forgotten when we report on things. And especially if you're going into, you know, an office with the C-suite and you put things in front of them, that's when like a lot of distrust and like credibility can be lost, is if they're skimming it and they can't understand what you're trying to say to them. And it's just a one sheet, then you're going to get a lot more questions and you're going to get answers and direction.
Well, I feel like we've seen so many companies that are doing reporting just to do reporting because it checks some box that they feel is an obligation. And I think the same is true. It's like no one looks at it. No one cares about it. And so it's all this work that someone is probably manually combining spreadsheets to produce this report just because it's some box checker. And I feel like a lot of times it's like, what business question are you trying to answer? That's where the story starts, right? It's like, what is most prevalent and burning, what's keeping you up at night that you need answers to? And that's often where we start, is let's start there. And then that builds the story. And a lot of times that's just like, we're going to pull back one layer and then that turns into something beautiful. But a lot of times when it's just something that feels obligatory or just, oh, we're a business, we should do this, you don't capture the beauty of what the story, the data can tell you. The beauty can be in the threats or the things that maybe are scary, but we need to know about so that we can address them and just not pretend like they're not there. And that makes me curious, Ted, you know, what you're saying suggests to me like you really believe in the power of data, right? In just the stories it can tell, but also the strategic decisions it can enable for businesses, and especially working a lot in the nonprofit sector. When and how did you really see that come to life or develop that conviction?
That story with Network Kansas, one of that was actually very transformative. There's like 2 or 3 things that came from that changed the way we approached those loan portfolios. The first was that everyone engaged with the data more because it was more accessible. The PDF was not accessible. It was not easy to use, not easy to digest. You couldn't make sense of it. So first off, we could move it and put it into people's hands. And so what we found was there was actually an untapped desire. They wanted that. They wanted the data. They weren't ignoring it because they didn't care. They were ignoring it because it didn't speak to them. And so by customizing it in a way that you could flip through all 8 of your buckets and say, okay, here's where this portfolio is and here's where this portfolio is, that created a sense of everyone engaged with the data more. The next thing that happened was we were able to create benchmarks and context. That 30-page PDF with 8-point font, you're just scrolling down row by row. You're not able to digest visually a sense of, is this good or bad?
Right.
It just is. It just is. And so what do you do with it? There's really no action you could take. There were maybe a few things they were trying to pick out of, like, this loan is past due or something. Maybe you could pick that out line by line. But how many loans past due is bad? Like, it's a loan portfolio. Like, some are going to be bad. How many is too many?
Mm-hmm.
We're not asked any of those questions. We're just like, that's bad. It was very binary. Bad, not bad.
But still, we don't have an action to take off of it otherwise.
Yeah. So then if you say, okay, I've got 8 portfolios, this portfolio, 20% are past due, this portfolio, 0% are past due. And now we're like, okay, this portfolio is doing better than this one. And then you start creating benchmarks. You say, well, we have 100 of these portfolios across. It's saying, what percentage of them are past due? What's a reference point that we can use across the board, and where are the challenging areas that we need to spend more resources or effort to improve them? And over time, we started abstracting more and more to where they are managing, I think, thousands of loans now, and they're able to do it in a really novel way for nonprofits of inside these really rural communities or underserved communities. They're able to bring loan capital in a way that's compelling and innovative, and they're able to keep tabs on it because they have reference points and benchmarks and they can build expectations. And the last thing that happened is, instead of just that data living in their organization, they pushed it out and shared it with those communities. Not only that, they said, and we'll show you how you compare to the rest. And they created this upward cycle of competition of saying, we want to have the best portfolio. As they got better portfolios, they got more resources, and it unlocked all of these opportunities.
Wow.
It raised the quality of the entire portfolio that was always there.
Yeah.
The data was there the whole time, but it wasn't distributed in a way that they could use it.
Yeah.
And I think that arc, that took years. That didn't happen overnight. That took years, but that raised the boats for everyone with a resource that was there, just not put to use.
What I love about that is that it didn't just create impact and efficiency and action within the organization, but it had the ripple effect that went down to who is the recipient of this loan portfolio. What are they doing with it? How does this reflect in their community? And that is a really great example of developing a data culture that exists beyond the walls that it lives in.
Yep.
Like, it brought the communities into it as well.
Yes.
That's super cool.
Was there any pushback, or how was the internal data culture created? Or was that like within people, there was no outlet for them to?
People don't like to do tedious things.
Agreed.
And if you give them an easier way, you are going with the grain. And like, honestly, all of it felt like it was with the grain. No one liked looking at that PDF. And when we gave them a better option, they're like, this is great. And what ended up happening is they said, could it do this? And could it do this? And could it do this? And so now you wouldn't even recognize what I first built, because we've added so many layers of complexity to building these benchmarks and reference points and understanding and just additional context, this deepening of the context for all of that work. That kind of built, but it all happened organically. There was no, like, from my perspective, one was like, we're going to be a data organization. That was never uttered in that organization. They became one by necessity, by everyone wants to do good work. I'm really convinced of that. And they saw this as a way they could do better work. I think the one thing where there might have been not even resistance, but some consideration was that next jump where they shared it. It's like, it's
that's
saying,
understandable.
We're going to be open with this, and we're going to be transparent with it. I love it philosophically. I love it because it's saying, essentially, this, you could think of it as there's all of these small kind of nonprofit organizations, and there's this one big funder. You could see this complexity in the power dynamics maybe, and saying, we're judging you. We're judging your performance. We're holding these carrots from you. And this is not true of Network Kansas, but I'm just saying, I'm painting a picture of how nonprofits work.
And that's similar to what we see in like sales teams and like B2B type organizations where the data's there, but when the data is shared with sales teams, it can be presented as, we're watching you.
Yes.
We're judging you.
We're showing this to you so you do
Instead
better.
of it being a collaborative, like, hey, look what we have to share with you.
Yes. I think there was a little bit of, we wanted to make sure we didn't embarrass anyone. That it was really, we were actually very careful of, we created neutral benchmarks. So you couldn't see everyone else's portfolio, but you could see your own and how it compares. And we really couched it with, this is a tool for you. It would be withholding to not share it. We want to share this, and we want you to have the best tools possible. to manage these resources as best you can for your community. And I would say it was overwhelmingly appreciated. And then it led to another layer where the community members were like, could we see this? And could we see this? And and it added even more context and nuance and depth and richness to the data.
That's so cool.
So, I mean, I think you've shared offline with us about just your passion for nonprofits and just the gap there is in technology, a need for technology, but maybe a gap in knowledge or know-how, or even someone wanting to get in there and just kind of help figure it out. I'd love to hear just kind of how your passion has grown for that and what you see as the biggest like opportunity in that space.
Man, I didn't plan on this. It just sort of came by it naturally. My wife and I started a nonprofit in 2012.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, we started, it's called Eight Oaks. It's in Ghana. It's a rehabilitation home for children.
Oh, wow.
We just hit, I think we're at 10 or 11 years just now.
Wow. Congratulations.
Yeah, the girls were like 6 to 10 and now they're in high school.
Wow.
And man, it's freaking crazy. It's incredible.
Do you go over there?
Yeah, I was there last October. We try to go once a year. We just had 3 kids.
Yeah, that
it's
happens.
less, so it's happening less. But yeah, that's really cool. That was not on the career path. That just sort of, happened. And then I started at Network Kansas because I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but that was a nonprofit that served entrepreneurs. I was like, this is perfect. And then after that, I was like, okay, I'm ready. I'll be an entrepreneur. I went out on my own, starting an analytics company. I merged with Moonbase because I needed custom software as well. That's my career trajectory. But as I was building at LionGraph and Moonbase, the people who kept coming to me were nonprofits. And I think it's because of the relationships I made at Network Kansas. Maybe it's just because I like them. And I just genuinely, they're doing the real work.
Yeah.
Like it's all uphill for nonprofits.
Yeah.
And they have to do less with more constantly. They're faced with infinite need and limited resources. That's a challenging thing to be in. And in my mind, I just don't get as much energy helping a for-profit company optimize and become more effective. Not that I don't. I love solving problems. I'll throw myself at lots of problems. When you do it with a nonprofit, there's a legit impact on the other side of that. If you can help them become more effective, they can become more impactful. They can use the money that they're given more resourcefully, more effectively. And I'm like, man, this is all upside.
Yeah.
I would love to do it. But software is frustrating for nonprofits. They're getting very tired. They're worn out. And I'm like, the last 6 months, I've met with so many nonprofit leaders trying to understand what's the root of this frustration. And I don't think I've gotten to the bottom of it, but I'm starting to build some hypotheses of why they are overlooked.
Can you share your hypothesis?
Are you tracking this in a spreadsheet?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I've got charts. Oh, I've loads of them. I think there's a few things, and this is not just unique to nonprofits. Software is moving really fast. Like in the 90s, it used to be sold in a box
Right.
at a store. Like you used to buy software in a box at a store.
crazy.
You would get the internet in the mail.
Yeah.
Remember?
Yeah,
You had
yeah,
to put the AOL CD in
Oh,
to
man.
get it.
Yeah, this is not that long ago. Like we sound
Yeah.
like we're 80 years
Right.
old
Yeah,
talking about the good old days when like you could buy a Coke for 5 cents. Like that's what we sound like.
I know.
But that's how fast it moves.
That's
Yeah.
how fast it moves.
Yeah.
So everyone's a little winded, like it's natural to feel behind, but I think just recently with the sort of burst of SaaS, software as a service, it used to be when you sold it in a box, Windows 95, when that came out, it went from Windows 95 to Windows 98. You had 3 years to breathe before you had to sell that next operating system. Well, now when everything's a monthly, like it'll have a mediocre event, a mediocre event, a knockoff of Eventbrite, and a mediocre payment processor, and a mediocre accounting, what have you. And it locks you into that because you're already deeply invested. I think that doesn't work. But I also think the platforms like Salesforce or Zoho, I think that one-stop shop is, if you need a implementation consultant and you have to spend
Right.
hundreds of thousands of dollars for it, there's probably something upstream that's an issue. Like maybe the process is too complicated.
Yeah.
Like I don't know if nonprofits need that huge of an investment. I'm working on some sort of philosophy where the best nonprofit tech stack is a flexible one with interconnected parts that can be swapped out every 3 years.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there's a sort of an overarching data model or philosophy that holds them together. But they're tied together with ropes. Nothing's in brick, nothing's in
So it's more
stone.
Yeah.
modular.
Modular, loosely connected, and you hold everything. You have to hold everything loose. I think people want to marry the software. it's just a friend. It's
Well,
like
I
friends.
think the sales model for a lot of the platforms is that, like, if you, especially with CRM systems, like you mentioned, Salesforce, Zoho, HubSpot. HubSpot's real good at doing this, where it's like, okay, now you've already gotten involved with putting all of your customers
Yes.
and companies that you work with, right, in there. That alone was a lot of manual work,
Yep.
most likely. You're now getting all of your business development, donor engagement, sales teams, whatever, involved in actually inputting that data. Also another hurdle that you've had to cross. Then when you get into like the modular components, then it's just additional increase in monthly subscription, increase in the amount of training that you need to have, increase in the amount of time that you need to
Yep.
put into it just to develop a system that works for you internally.
Yep.
And we've talked about this a lot, where that you have to go all in on the, like, you have the mentality that you have to go all in
Yep.
on any of these platforms to truly maximize it. Like,
To get your
I
money's worth.
use HubSpot as the example because HubSpot used to be a lot more flexible in the way
Yep.
that you're talking about it, right? It's probably not great for their business model
Right.
to be that flexible anymore. But if you start with their free CRM and you want some basic sales automations included, well, now you have to upgrade to the sales tier. Well, now you want to take those sales automations, but then also couple it with some essential basic marketing automation, type stuff, that like email marketing automation. Well, now you have to get the marketing tier.
Yes.
Okay, now you really want it to be a lot like more automated and seamless across sales and marketing. Well, guess what? Now you have to get to the enterprise suite. Otherwise, you're in that data silo and manual pulling and reviewing. And so I like that philosophy of connected, but not in a rigid way.
Mhm.
Because I think what we end up seeing a lot in at least like corporate world is when that scenario comes into play where you need that flexibility to grow and evolve, and you
Yep.
really can't get married into a system. They go the custom route.
Yep.
And that's fine if you have the team and the brain power to fully like develop that and make it what you need. But then that becomes years in the making before you actually get to start using it. And as you mentioned, like, technology is just moving so quickly. By the time that's ready to go,
Yep.
is it still what you needed to begin with? Or does that job just become evolving constantly before you actually really get to use the power of it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's also an issue at the analytics layer of all of that, because as things are changing, that makes reporting and visualization really frustrating, because if they're switching every year, or they need to switch every year, or whatever the case may be, data's coming in from one place, but now it's no longer, and those things aren't connected, or it's in one system that gives you silos or doesn't produce the reports natively that you need, then people get extra frustrated.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because they can't see what's even happening in all of these systems, and it's so disparate. I mean, either way, it's hard either way, right?
Yeah.
They all,
I
Yeah.
never blame anyone for chasing the one-stop shop.
Yeah.
It sounds so appealing.
Sounds great. Yeah.
I've never seen it work.
right.
But I understand why. And I'm not even saying this sort of loosely connected thing. This has trade-offs too. I think everything about technology is trade-offs. And you have to just pick which trade-offs you can live with. I think the one that what I see people choose is software that's not for them. And they try and like shoehorn it in. And
Yeah.
I think if it says enterprise and you're a nonprofit, run. Like, that's not you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're going to have extra zeros on that
I was
monthly
gonna say, that
subscription
price
to
tag is
it.
not gonna
Yeah.
be friendly.
Enterprise almost automatically
Yeah.
means more.
But I think maybe also the business model for these software companies, the gravity is towards larger companies. That's where success comes from. More users. If it's a per user per month, they want more users. If you're a 5-person nonprofit, you're at the bottom of their
Right.
priority list. And so what ends up happening is I've never seen a monthly feature release where the company comes out and says, hey, we took away these 10 features that were not popular, and now the app is more focused and precise. It adds and adds and adds. Complexity is the enemy. These software systems, the arc of it, that's why I say like 3 years, they only get more complex.
Yeah.
They never get simpler. There's very few companies. Basecamp is maybe one where they've restrained themselves.
Yeah.
They've been so disciplined to not constantly add new features, but they're not VC backed. They don't
Yeah.
have pressure. They're not trying to IPO. They don't have to hit ridiculous growth goals. So they can stay small and focused. That's very rare though in software. Most software, you want to catch it on like the first like 3 to 5 years. And then once they start talking about their enterprise layer, you leave and you go to the next one in. And that requires a flexibility that does not quite jive with the nonprofit culture I'm around yet. But I think if they can embrace change, they'll be better for it instead of trying to hold on to things and white knuckle.
You know, I think we could have a whole other episode just on this topic, because a lot of what you're hitting on is very common that we hear in the business and corporate world as well. There might be something within this philosophy that you're really like working around, in that change is the only constant.
Yes.
And I talk about this a lot with clients when we're just talking about marketing strategy in general. Do not get married to tactics. Do not get married to tools. Social is going to change just as rapidly. It's technology, right? Like the platforms are going to change rapidly. Consumer behavior because of that will change, which means that you also have to change. Is there an opportunity actually to take a step back from the tech implementation and the build side of it and actually help organizations with that mentality of how do you develop really good systems and processes now around the data and insights and the collection that you want to have over time, but build that system in a way that it actually doesn't really matter what tool you're using, that if a pivot needs to occur, you're already equipped with, we already knew this was coming. We are not going to be nervous about it. We're going to adjust because we already have the mentality, the process, the know-how to shift a lot easier than if we're in that mentality of, okay, well, I'm not enamored with Zoho anymore, and Salesforce with all of its add-ons is like wooing me in that direction. So, but are we going to do it? What's that migration look like? You know, those are where all of that, like where the mentality ends up going. If we drop that, the tactic and the tool out of it and just focus on what are the outcomes, what is the desire for our 10-year strategic plan, does not matter what road we're walking on as long as we're going in that right direction. Is there something within helping organizations with that that could be successful for that next step in like actual tech implementation?
I think it has to happen. I don't know if it can, but it has to happen, because I think you can't be at the mercy of 10 different software companies' release cycle. You just can't live like that. You have to have someone in the organization saying, hey, I know they are saying you can use our software like da-da-da-da-da with this long list of features. That's what they say. Here's the 4% of this software we use and why we use it and the function it provides and the reason it's really important. And you just have to ignore the rest. The bigger the tool, the more they have to ignore. Those are just basically potholes that they can step in. I think of Asana. It's a beautiful tool. It's a beautiful, I love Asana, but they're post prime. They're post prime. They IPO'd, they're enterprise. When they launched, there used to be projects and tasks. You think about every project management software, it's projects and tasks. It's the same pattern, same relationship. Projects are big, tasks are small. You think about this, Asana will let you subtask a task. Okay. So that's 3 layers deep. I think you can infinitely subtask.
You can. I have Asana for Bonfire Strategy, and I got it because all I needed was a checklist for client projects, where we're at, tracking like our budget and our time and all of that. I just needed a place that wasn't a notebook, right?
A list.
It is too much,
it's too
though.
much.
And my Julia, our account coordinator at Bonfire, and she has totally like transformed the way that we use Asana. She's done a great job with it. But even when she came on board, I just looked at her and I was like, I don't even know if this is the right tool. I don't know if we are right for, you know, Asana. I don't know if we're maximizing its capability. I don't even know if we need to maximize it. Like,
Probably
here
not.
are the 5 these are the 5 things that I actually need in order to feel confident that we're delivering the service that we need to deliver to the clients, that we're holding ourselves accountable, and that I have a way to track against billing. I have the mentality sometimes, like when you start looking at your subscriptions and your business costs and stuff, like it does always come back to me on, do we actually need to be spending that for the features that we're actually using, knowing that 95% of what other bells and whistles they've brought on board, I don't even need to touch. There's no reason. And it's just more time for us to touch those that we don't need to spend.
But inevitably, the one feature that you do want requires you to upgrade.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think saying we're the boss, not the software.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge mentorship. Is like, no, you don't tell us what features we need. I'll tell you which features I would like, and then we're going to ignore the rest. The purpose of that tool is to allow for collaboration, and so that we don't lose track of things.
Well, guess what? I don't even know where half my subtasks are.
Yeah.
Okay.
They baked in a giant cliff,
Yeah.
and they said, "Here you go," and they didn't put any railings on it or anything, and they just said, "Walk here as fast as you can." And I'm terrified of that. And then a few years ago, think about this. It's a hierarchy: projects, tasks, subtasks that go infinitely. It's an infinite Russian doll going down. They added a new layer above projects called portfolios. They added, which are groups of projects. And my mind burst when they did this. And I understood why they did it. I understood why. How many layers? How many layers do we need to run our 6-person organization? How many layers?
And there are teams, and so it's like teams are associated to portfolios, and portfolios include projects, and projects include tasks and subtasks and blah, 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 blah. And then you have all these other things that you want to include, like, estimated time, actual time, or like dependencies on like scheduling. I mean, it's more than a full-time job. And by the way, there are just 2 people at Bonfire. And when I think about it is important work for us to like keep track of things. And Julie has done such a fantastic job. She's really boiled it down to this is all that we really need to work with here. And we're still working out a few kinks, but miles ahead of where we were just 3 months ago. But it is mind-boggling when it's just 2 of us.
Yes. Well, you said you started with, I need a list of things to keep track. But now that they're there, you kind of feel like, well, maybe I should use them. And now the software is
I'm going to tell
you down
Asana today, I'm the boss.
You're the boss.
That is my takeaway from this conversation.
Hold up on your computer.
Yes.
No, I'm the boss.
That's honestly, if I had one message for nonprofits, be the boss of your software. Don't let it tell you what to do.
Question.
Oh, sorry.
So don't say it.
Oh, all right, hold on.
Ted, if you had one thing to tell nonprofits that you'd want to leave them with, and I'm honestly for-profits too, what's your one thing?
I think it's be the boss of your software.
Be the boss.
I think because they're releasing features so much, that's not for us. If you think about how they pick those features, they go to the forums and they see what most people are complaining about. Most people aren't on the forums. The people on the forums are the power users. The power users aren't us. They need portfolios and they need infinite subtasks. I don't know what they're doing that they need that, but they believe in their bones they need that. And they've got 100 others commenting on that forum. And the engineers are like, yes, they need that. We have evidence for it. What they aren't able to make the trade-off, the software companies not making the trade-off, is that 80% of us who aren't the power users, who just need a list, we're getting thrown around by these needs. And it's wearing us out. We're not churning. We're still there, but we're tired. And it's having negative effects for us that the software company's not feeling. So I would say take it back. I've seen a lot of nonprofits like adopt Slack. Slack's a cool tool. If you adopt that without some thinking behind why we adopted Slack, it's actually a tyrant and it will destroy you. We're
going to make that another episode.
No one
software
needs,
that kills you.
Yeah, no one needs 24/7 access to their boss. No one needs that. You don't need push notifications on your boss. That's a 8 to 5 thing. No one needs instant response to almost anything. That's rare. The only time you need an instant response to something is like, hey, I'm locked out. Could you help me in? Like that's a great use for Slack. Or, hey, could you start the Zoom? I'm 5 minutes late. Perfect. I love having Slack for that. A lot of that probably should just be emails though. And if you don't set expectations for communication around, what we do is we unleash Slack. Some people are like, I have instant access to everyone in this organization. And some people are like, I'll get to it when I get to it. And some people are like, I'm never logging into that. That's not going to help anyone. All we've done is just exhaust everyone and created more miscommunication. The thing that was supposed to help us communicate is creating more miscommunications, more misunderstandings. We have to create policy. We have to create policy, or at least a culture that says, we're bringing this tool in because we have this problem. So-and-so continues to get locked out every single morning, and email is not responsive enough to let them in the door. we need something instant. Or what other problem you have where you need instant access to someone else, you should probably email and wait a day. Like that, there's nothing that urgent.
Yeah.
And if you're responding that urgently, you're diminishing your culture. This is where software is doing more harm than good.
Yeah.
Like we're just saying they have Slack, they have Slack, we need Slack. And we didn't think about what problem it was actually solving. And it actually wasn't even a problem. We just threw Slack at something that didn't exist and we created more problems. So we got to be the boss. We got to say, this is what we need it for.
Yeah. And
Beautiful.
a whole nother rabbit trail is like what burnout and other problems does having access to your work all the time cause.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into that. So we'll just
I wrote down, you're coming back, Ted. We're having this conversation again.
We got to keep going. Round 2.
So honored.
Round 2. Well, thank you, Ted, for joining us. And as always, if you have any questions, if this brought up anything for you, reach out to us via email at hello@insightlypodcast.com. We'd love to answer your questions. We're collecting questions as we go so that we can do hopefully a mailbag episode. But please reach out. We'd love to talk to you, answer your questions, and we'll see you next time.